Texas desperado no longer exists. This is how the newspapers recorded it. John Wesley Hardin, a gunfighter born of post-Civil War violence, fell at the Acme Saloon in El Paso when lawman John Selman shot him. The episode, on August 19, 1895, followed years of escapes and imprisonment. The obituary marked the end of a criminal career in the twilight of the Old West. Taken in 1907 in the Bolivian Andes, this is considered the last known photograph of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. In it, Cassidy appears mounted on his mule, while Sundance, beside him, adjusts tack and tends to his own animal. The image belongs to the duo's final period, already on the run and under surveillance by local authorities. Depicted in 1907 by Emerson Howe in The Story of the Outlaw, John Simpson Chisholm had been in the cattle trade since 1854. Between 1866 and 1867, he partnered with Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving, driving herds to the New Mexico Territory. His ranch years later sheltered Billy the Kid and regulators during the Lincoln County War in 1878. Apache Kid, a San Carlos Apache, served as a guide for the U.S. Army in Arizona. In 1887, after a mutiny and shootout in San Carlos, he was convicted, escaped, and became the target of long pursuits by posses and rangers. He operated between Arizona and Sonora until disappearing. Accounts differ on whether he was captured or killed in the early 20th century. One of the Midnight Men, John W. Poe from Kentucky, migrated to Texas in the 1870s, worked as a buffalo hunter, and later became a lawman. In 1881, at age 31, the Canadian River Cattle Association hired him as a detective to hunt Billy the Kid and his gang. Poe fulfilled the mission by accompanying Pat Garrett to Fort Sumner on the night of July 14th, when Billy was killed. William Clark Quantrill, mentor of the James brothers, led Quantrill's raiders in Confederate guerrilla actions along the Missouri-Kansas border, attacking Union detachments and towns. He was killed by Union forces in May 1865, in the final combats of the Civil War, leaving behind a tactical legacy that Frank and Jesse would later apply in their outlaw careers. Who was the most notorious lawman of New Mexico? Many recall Pat Garrett. Among Hispanics, the answer is El Fuego Baca. Garrett became famous for killing an outlaw in a darkened room. Baca, in 1884, resisted about 80 white cowboys, surviving nearly 4,000 shots and dynamite. After this siege, violence in Socorro came to an end. Ezra Allen Minor, known as Bill Minor, served time in the U.S. for horse theft and stagecoach robbery. Released in 1880, he returned to crime and became known as the Gray Fox. In 1904, he carried out in Canada what is considered the first successful train robbery. Oral tradition credits him with the command, "Hands up," now widespread in Western lore. Badman Brooks, or Billy Brooks, served as a marshal in Newton, Kansas, and later in Dodge City. After controversial shooting incidents, he left the law. In 1874, he drove stagecoaches for the Southwestern Stage Company. When the postal contract was lost, he joined a scheme to rob rival shipments. Captured, he was lynched by a mob on July 29th. Tom Blackjack Ketchum, an outlaw of the West, appears after his capture, already with his right arm amputated from wounds suffered while attempting to rob a Colorado and Southern train. On April 26, 1901, in the New Mexico Territory, he was hanged for that attempted robbery. Captured in 1899, the case illustrates the hardening of railroad law. California gold miner. Between 1848 and 1855, the gold rush attracted migrants of many origins and generated demand for portraits. Studio photographs in daguerreotype and ambrotype recorded workers posing with pans and pickaxes as proof of trade, for sending to relatives and for advertisements. Today they rank among the most sought-after images of the Old West. Probable historical error. The famous photo attributed to Josie, wife of Wyatt Earp, likely does not depict her. The image used by Glenn Boyer on the cover of I Married Wyatt Earp 1976, was advertised in 1880. Research indicates it is actually a photogravure from 1914, published under the title Coloma, evidence of later commercial reuse. Dan Thrapp, an expert on the Apache Wars, fixed Al Sieber's legacy in the 1964 biography Al Sieber, Chief of Scouts. Sieber, a German and Civil War veteran, led George Crook's scouts in Arizona during campaigns against the Chiricahua. In 1887, he was crippled after a shootout linked to the Apache Kid, marking the end of his career. Not the chief, you think. The label Mangas, chief of the Warm Spring Apaches, caused confusion. Many mistook him for Mangus Coloradus, a 19th century Apache leader in the U.S. Southwest. In fact, it is his namesake son, photographed by A. Frank Randall in 1886. The Smithsonian holds an albumen copy from the collection of General Nelson A. Miles. In 1821, merchant William Becknell opened the Santa Fe Trail, the first international route between New Mexico, then a Mexican province, and the western U.S. frontier. The circulation of merchants, soldiers, settlers, and freight caravans made the city a hub. In the early 1880s, the railroad reduced its use and the route became obsolete. Known as the Cowboys of the Massacre, taken around 1885. A cabinet card image by photographers Charles S. Baker and Eli Johnston in Douglas, Arizona Territory shows real cowboys employed by Texas John Slaughter at the San Bernardino Ranch, near present-day Douglas in cross-border U.S.-Mexico cattle herding. John Burwell Omohundro Jr., known as Texas Jack, gained fame on drives along the Chisholm Trail. He brought lasso acts to the stage with Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill Cody, seen as a pioneer. In 1877, he created the Texas Jack combination. He died of pneumonia in Leadville, Colorado, a month before turning 34. In 1908, Cody commissioned a tombstone but recorded his age as 39. Photographed around 1865, Tiburcio Vasquez became one of the most well-known Hispanic bandits of the American West. Between 1850 and 1874, he led stagecoach robberies, thefts, and cattle rustling. In 1874, reporter George Beers of the San Francisco Chronicle shot him. Captured, he was tried and hanged in 1875 in San Jose, California. Cabinet card of Ben Thompson. Studio portrait 1875, printed and mounted on stiff card. It shows the notorious gunfighter and Austin police chief posed half-length in formal attire with a neutral background. A typical format of the period used for public sale and circulation in family albums. Titled, The True Cowboy Captured Alive. This 1880s cabinet card records on the left, Cottonwood Charlie Nebo alongside Nicholas Janis, a French-American settler in the Nebraska Territory. Sources place him as a descendant, or perhaps brother, of Joseph Antoine, interpreter at Fort Laramie in what was then the Wyoming Territory. Peter Bogardus, born into a famous lineage of marksmen, wielded a Remington Model 1888 and carried another at his waist. Under the guidance of his father, Captain Bogardus, he joined, along with his brothers Eugene, Edward, and Henry, shooting acts in Buffalo Bill's Wild West, the traveling show that spread shooting culture at the end of the 19th century. Between 1835 and 1885, former Texas Rangers, known as 49ers, acted as mercenaries along the border. In exchange for official payments, Mexican state governments hired private companies to suppress Apache and Comanche raids. The human scalp became proof of service and a source of income for these groups in a violent market. Resident of the bottom, the bullwhacker in the photo, C. 1850, brandishes the whip used to drive oxen hitched to freight wagons. A central profession practiced by men and some women, it kept convoys moving and ensured commercial flow before the railroad. Despite their importance, these drivers occupied the lowest rung of the social hierarchy. Carte de visite, dated 1878, with the portrait of Charles Baudry and his wife Manuela. The copy, stained with blood, was taken from Baudry's body after the confrontation at Stinking Springs, New Mexico, on December 23, 1880, when Lincoln County Sheriff Pat Garrett shot him, and in the same action, captured Billy the Kid. In 1887, Cherokee leader Ned Christie was accused, without evidence, of murdering Federal Deputy Marshal Dan Maples. Pursued for years in Indian Territory, he resisted successive sieges. In 1892, an armed band killed him, dynamiting his hideout. Afterwards, lawmen tied the corpse to a door and posed for photos, displaying him as a trophy.